Welcome to episode 5 of Provocative Conversations. Hello, Dr. Alicia.
Hello, Dr. Renee. How are you?
I am pretty good. I'm excited. I think hope everyone saw the post about 207 new listeners in just the first 3 weeks, which I think is awesome. So I'm very, very
Woohoo!
excited. Yes, very happy.
Me too. Another listener who really loved our honorary doctorate episode talked about how
Mhm.
there was the world's oldest dolphin at Marineland who had an honorary doctorate. She
Well,
loved
good.
her, but she passed away sadly, so may
Aw.
she rest in peace.
Yes. Well, that's good. At least everyone can see how much of a joke it is and that, this false prestige really does more harm than good. But actually, like in PR world, all press is good press. So even with it being a joke of the dolphin getting on, I think it just makes it more salient that it's not really about accomplishment. It's just about money and publicity.
Yes.
So that was good. Thank you for that.
And thanks for educating us on the honorary doctorates. I had no idea the depths of scam that it can
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. Unfortunately. We also had an update about CRT that you said you wanted to share.
We did. So Florida. I just thought I would mention.
We need to think of something like Go Hard Florida or Buck Wild Florida or something.
Well, they have Florida Man, and those are always fun. So, Florida Man, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis,
Mm.
actually proposed. Well, there's this bill that was signed into law, and it is called. I thought you would appreciate this. That's why I wanted to bring it up. The
Okay.
Stop Woke Act.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
woke stands for wrongs against our kids and employees.
Oh
So
wow.
Stop Wrongs Against Our Kids and Employees Act, Stop Woke Act.
I've
But
just said that, which is tongue in cheek, because why would you
yes,
even say woke
woke,
if you weren't trying
right?
to be woke?
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
And that would prevent K-12 schools from using state funding to hire consultants that adhere to critical race theory in quotations, and would give
Oh.
parents private right of action to sue if they believed their children were being taught the theory.
Oh wow.
Additionally, there were two other bills proposed just in the month of January of 2022 that would prohibit instructional materials reviewers from recommending curricula that promote certain concepts related to race or sex. So,
Mm. Okay.
a lot of good stuff happening. There are others too that I was like paying attention to
Mm-hmm.
after we spoke. There's one in New Hampshire, and this is a new bill that was pre-filed in December of 21 for this 2022 session. It prohibits teachers from advocating socialism, Marxism, or this is what gets me, quote,
Mm-hmm.
any doctrine or theory promoting a negative account or representation of the founding and history of the United States of America.
Oh wow. But the founding of it was not good.
Well,
It
that
wasn't,
and yeah,
yeah.
but also negative account. So isn't that
Yeah.
an objective way of
Right.
anyway?
That's making it very centered. So don't say anything bad about us. Like, don't say the truth. I mean, you don't have any problem saying negative things about other people or spinning narratives. I think, this is again another reverse type of indoctrination where they don't really want to know the truth because of the damage that it can hold to either their own egos or their opportunities for power.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
So
well, thank you for sharing that. Yes.
we'll be keeping our eye on all that stuff
Mm-hmm.
as it moves through because a lot of legislative sessions are happening right now.
Right. Well, for today, people may think this might be a negative connotation, but it really is just more of this scientific explanation. So hopefully everyone listening will take it as more of an education that's unbiased and just educational and informative.
Yes, I'm really excited about this episode, The Psychology of Racism, the Instinct to Survive, because we
Hmm.
are very lucky that you, Dr. Renee, have used a lot of your professional capacity to speak on this topic. And
Yes.
the topic of race and diversity has become a buzzword. It's like a corporate mandate. It's a political
Mm-hmm.
platform. So it's been, thrown around a lot.
Right.
And, regardless, it is important to understand how these issues, or, even just the ideas of race and diversity, became something that we are even talking about.
I
And
agree.
yeah.
Yes.
So I thought, I'm excited about this episode because I am not an expert on this topic, but you
Mm-hmm.
are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I am really looking forward to just sitting back and being, absorbing your knowledge.
Okay. Okay.
And hopefully, we can have a dialogue here and there about, some of these things. And
Yeah, and definitely interject. One of our taglines is, different opinions or different views. So obviously, I'm African, mostly African American, and you are mostly Caucasian. So I definitely want to hear your input, your thoughts, and your feedback. While I'm speaking, because you may be able to speak what other white persons are thinking and saying, but may be too afraid to say, which is what we do here, and I can answer it. And we could just have an intellectual conversation and not one of trying to tear down or become divisive. So I'm looking forward to it.
and by the way, I'm not mostly white. I'm all white.
Okay.
According to my ancestry DNA, I'm probably more British than the people living in Britain right
Oh,
now. So
wow. Okay. Well, you're the most, quote, woke British person that I know. So that'll be exciting. Okay, good, good, good.
well,
Well,
let's jump in.
as a political and corporate advisor, then part of what I do is I help high profile political and corporate leaders solve social problems. And race is a social problem when it comes to racism, because based off of race, racism, or even the understanding of disparities and inequities, it's a social problem that a lot of legislators and corporate leaders try to address so they can solve some of our most challenging issues, whether it's in legislation, in corporate settings, or even in our communities. But whenever you're talking about people, race is obviously about people, then people are humans, and humans have psychology that focuses on how they think, how they feel, and how they behave. And also, with the understanding of psychology, it influences how they are persuaded. So, as a psychologist, obviously it's a science degree. And when we focus on only making conclusions about predictable behavior or being able to understand humans or a group of humans, we use a scientific methodology. And so it's called the empirical method. And the way to say if a study is really valid or not, meaning can it produce the same results, then we would have a reliability coefficient. So, which I'm sure you know, Dr. Alicia.
Mm-hmm.
So, if it's valid, meaning that it measures exactly what it says it's going to measure. And if it's reliable, meaning can we rely on this test to do the same thing over and over again? So, the information I'll talk about here, as well as all that we base our information on when we give resources to our readers, is usually based off of scientific information or fact based information that has a reliability coefficient of at least zero point 0.9. So, zero point 0.9 equals 90%. So, in all of the studies that I will reference now and anytime we're on the show, meaning that it's at least 90% reliable, that what we are saying will happen 90% of the time. Or out of 10 people, every nine group of people, a group of nine people, we can expect and predict that they will respond in a particular way. Was research methodology one of your favorite classes?
Uh, actually, yes, in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
and then no in others. But
Yeah, it was just interesting to me just for the information. But when we're talking today about the psychology of racism, we're going to look at, from a scientific lens, how to understand race and diversity based off of scientifically proven tests and reliable methods that produce data and behavioral observations that are statistically significant, as well as have a reliable predictive value. So again, this is just a very nerdy conversation about how to just understand what race and how race developed for into racism. So
Mhm.
let's start off with evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology is a theoretical approach to psychology that explains how the biological evolution of humans has produced the consistent and reliable behavioral observations that we see today. So, what that means is that we're going to look at how humans have evolved over time and how they have evolved over time. We can then look at that from a scientific standpoint to be able to predict what humans will do in the future. So, just like one example is that as scientists, we can predict from an evolutionary psychology standpoint that 100 years from now, so what in 2122, the children that are born on this day, 100 years from now, will be between 8 and 9 centimeters, or 3.15 and 4.15 inches taller than if they had been born today. So that's showing us how we can use skeletal remains and understanding human behaviors and seeing how they can actually grow based off of what they're doing. So we can predict in 100 years from now that there'll be at least 3 to 4.5 inches taller. And this has been the same trend that we're seeing since 1921. We can all, as far as the studies, well, we can actually go back further into at least 1,000 years looking at skeletal remains and still looking at that observation. We also know from looking at evolution that the human intelligence increases approximately 3 IQ points every decade. This is known as the Flynn effect. This is regardless of race and it's regardless of gender. So this doesn't mean that every 10 years you'll become 3 IQ points more intelligent. What it just means is that every 10 years in the human race, when children are being born, that group of children born 10 years from now will already be reborn 3 points higher in IQ than those who had been born today.
Hmm.
So that's pretty interesting. But all that lets us know is that we can just predict trends and not only how humans grow biologically as far as their height, but also intellectually. And once we know how they grow intellectually, most human existence and human intelligence is based off of, well, how long were they able to survive with this intelligence? So that brings us into the sociology and the psychological part of survival. When we look at the biological evolution and we cross examine it with how humans survive, then that's the subcategory of psychology. So, sociology, think of it like social media. How are we socially becoming together? How are we socially evolving as a group? And so, usually, sociology is the understanding of how parts of a society fit together and change. And that's how we get our human relationships, how our social systems evolve, and how we can then start to understand human relationships and social relationships. And it's important for any society, in order for it to survive, there must be enough resources for the members in that society to live and to biologically flourish. So, when we're thinking about how societies live and how they biologically flourish, what we mean is how long, if a baby is born, how long will that baby be able to survive in that environment or in that social condition? And in order for babies to survive, there has to be like a unit of people protecting that baby, and then all the groups of babies that come along with it. So they grow into younger kids, older kids, get married, and have more kids. If one group of people was always dying off because they didn't have enough environmental resources, or their gene pool might have had some type of abnormalities, then they wouldn't live long. So we look at social psychology as a whole. How did this particular group, or how did the whole human race in general, how did they survive and come to be? And usually what happens is we find that it's the social norms. So norms, it's like, what is normal? What do we do normally in society? And social norms are the spoken and the unspoken expectations of how each member in that particular human group is supposed to act. And based off of how well you abide by these social norms, you can guarantee that you'll have either collaboration, which is we're working together, reciprocity, which is, well, if I do this for you, then you'll do this for me, And then also you can guarantee that you'll have safety, meaning that if I'm a person in this human group and I am a collaborator and I also reciprocate, I can enjoy the safety of being able to stay in this group and for me and my tiny family to live and survive and have resources and also have protection from other groups of people. So, do you see how these group of behaviors lead to our understanding that human survival is a social issue? You can't just
Hmm.
truly, you cannot be, a man on an island because you need other people to truly survive.
Yes, that makes sense.
Um, there was this really, I had eye surgery a year ago, and I only could listen to Audible. And there was this great book called Cyber Storm by Matthew Mather. And it was just an excellent example of what would happen in modern day world if we had like a digital breakdown. It would be like a modern day apocalypse. And what it just shows is that in any human condition, when what we are depending on breaks down, we go back to our innate instinct to survive, which is going down into smaller and smaller groups, and that you would be willing to kill just to make sure that you and your loved ones were being safe. I thought that was a really good example, if I say so myself, but definitely, but you can read the book if you want to. But what it shows in not only the book, but also in social psychology, that early human populations had to overcome very hostile environments. So we have air conditioning now, we have heating and electricity, but they didn't have that back then. And so it was very hostile. They were out in the cold environment geographically and environmentally. And in order to survive and to just be warm, they had to physically huddle together, but they also had to huddle together their resources. And so the humans that we are now is because those humans, our ancestors, were able to cooperate within their groups to ensure the safety and survival of all of the members. And that's why we are who we are and having technology like Zoom and everything else today. But
Hmm.
whenever you have like really short periods of lack and predictable patterns of harsh conditions, such as like a seasonal change, then humans can kind of like work together. The problem is whenever you have longer periods of lack or longer periods of extreme hardship, then the more intense the harshness of the conditions, it means that you will have the less cooperation and the less willingness to share resources. And then you also have less safety in numbers because everyone kind of goes out for themselves. And how this begins when we look at the racism part of it is that think of every particular group of people in the world all started on one particular mountain. And in that mountain, there was enough food for everybody. But then what happens is now there happens to be either a storm, an ice storm, or a hurricane that wipes half of the continent out. And when you have half the continent wiped out, then you also have less resources. So when you have less resources, then you focus on, okay, well, then who are our in groups? And your in group are the group that you are most likely the same. So my in group today would be, moms. I'm in a sorority. I'm also a female group. I'm a psychologist group. So those would be my in groups. But back then, in order to survive, you go off of the sameness characteristics that are very obvious. So if you had a characteristic of being like a hunter or a gatherer, then you might be in one group. If you have a meat eating group, you might be in another group. So those would be called your in groups. You see how it's working so far?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. And then the groupings would be based off of not only these very obvious external and behavioral characteristics, but they would also be based off of the proximity to each other. So if I were a hunter and you were a hunter, but we were 10,000 miles away back then, we would not be considered in the same group. We would not be in the same in group because we wouldn't have the closeness in our geography to help each other to survive.
Hmm.
So what happens is that the more and more scarce resources you have, the more humanity will divide and continue to divide into smaller and smaller groups of obvious sameness. So let's look at how it starts. one group of people, we might say it's 1,000 individuals in this group of sane people. We'll call them the greenies. So the greenies are all in one group. Now we have a harsh ice storm and half of our people are dying. Now we're only down to 500. So we have less resources and we have less manpower. So in order to survive, we can do okay for a little while. But as the resources become less and less because the ice storm has killed all of our vegetation, killed all of our wildlife, then people will then start breaking into smaller and smaller groups. So you might have the 500 will then divide into, okay, well, the biggest group would be, okay, well, who's male and who's female? Then you might go into who's tall and then who's short. Then you might go into, okay, well, we are on this side of the tree and you're on that side of the tree, or you're better at ice fishing and we're better at making the ingredients. So it'll eventually break down into the smaller and smaller groups into all you have is your only sameness is that we are from the same nuclear family. And nuclear family is what you have like in a traditional family. It's a group of people who are united by ties of partnership and parenting or marriage. And it usually is just the two adults and the children or the children who are recognized as belonging to that family. So imagine a world where our resources become so little that we no longer can just be like, okay, well, we're all in this one community. Okay, well, now we're only the ones who are just in this community circle. Now we're only the ones who are on in this building that we live in. And then it gets even smaller. So now we're only focusing on who's on our floor in this building. Now resources are even more depleted. Okay, now it's just us, whoever lives in our apartment or condo. So again, it breaks down so small until you have the very, very little bit of cooperation and sharing of resources.
Sounds like the pandemic.
Yes, very much true. When I was watching it, I was just like, wow, this is just like so amazing. And people were becoming afraid. No, we don't have resources. I'm going to take 10 bags of toilet tissue so that me and my family, people were becoming more and more stingy and selfish with their needs, and they were not considering other people. But that was a perfect example. But the problem is, whenever you have just a nuclear family, one family and one person cannot sustain itself indefinitely. So then eventually we start going back into getting bigger and bigger. But this time we start growing into sameness of family like groups. So, say, for example, if I lived in, for the building example, to continue with that, if I lived in building A, then maybe on our floor, okay, look, you guys, we ran out of bread. You guys have milk. Let's let our floor be the floor. We'll all share resources together. And then we end up running out of food. So we would decide to go with another floor. Now let's go to the floor right above us. Hey, you guys, let's group all of our resources together so now we can be together. And we would eventually keep getting bigger and bigger on one sameness characteristic. When you look at this in a historical or a sociological standpoint, those smaller and smaller groups ended up becoming just true biological families. And when they were just true biological families, they might have said, okay, well, you know what? Our family is not going to make it. Let's go with that other family that's also looking like how we look and does the things that we like to do. So usually the family gets all the way down to the nuclear family, and then out of need of survival will then start to reach out again. But this time they're only joining families that are very similar in at least one single same characteristic of race, or a combination of the same race and also the same geography. So this is how you can have a great race of people, different colors, different ethnicities, but because of their same geographic location and same need to survive, they will collaborate. But they will still have the same characteristics because of their social environment. So if we were to have the greenies that were living in the Arctic, they're going to run out of resources very quickly. So then those greenies, those group of people will then migrate to more environmentally friendly places. And the more and more they migrate, the more
Mm-hmm.
their differences will be pronounced compared to the places where they're going, or people who don't look like them because they have more sun, they have, maybe different ways of living. Their diet may be different just because of what their geography provides from them from the land. So the more and more the people from the cold island or cold place are going to the warmer and warmer places, you can then see where you will have a difference in physical characteristics of race, behavioral characteristics of race. But from a psychological standpoint, what will stand out is the need to survive. So imagine you come from this very cold place, you're able to migrate to this very warm place. People who are usually in the warmer areas were not experiencing the environment as being harsh and untrustworthy or unreliable. They were also more likely to want to share resources. So the people come down from the mountains or the frozen area, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, this group of people, they have, we'll call them the orange people. The orange people have all of the sunshine, they have all of this food, the trees, their children are vibrant. Wow, let's take this. And it's not like they're taking it from a standpoint of our race is better than your race, but they have been psychologically traumatized of seeing their own babies dying. And they don't have the history of knowing that, okay, well, my environment will continually provide for me. My family will always be here and be able to live and live for long generations of time because they've had experience for their generation after generation. People were dying right next to them or throughout their own family lineage. So they're coming to a place that is more fruitful, is more abundant, and giving not only in the persons who are there, but also the environment. Their instinct to survive will now say, let's take over this land. We need to have this so that we can survive. And the people who are there are like, oh, yeah, of course, let's all be together because they're used to sharing. They're not used to really having as much of a lack. And so, because of that, that's when you have one group of people now being recognized, as we said last time, with the social construct of race. The mountain people, they're coming in, they're taking over the generosity, or they're taking over the land that is being generous and being able to provide for the people just as a way to ensure that their own family can survive. But when they do that, they're doing it from a survival and a greed standpoint and not any longer from a community standpoint. And this is just what happens. Like, you have one coming to another area geographically, and then that then becomes the race. So now we can say, okay, well, those people, they are shorter because maybe they had to have short trees to climb on or to crawl under. Whereas this group of people, they are taller because they had longer stretches of land to be in, or they had taller trees to reach for. So they evolved biologically to suit their environment. And those biological transitions and evolution allowed it to create very physical, external, objective characteristics that we can see, which then make up racial differences just by looking at someone. Um, so eventually, as the different races were introduced to each other, the races that migrated from the harsher climates were more likely to pilfer for the resources from the groups that were living in a less harsh climate or less harsh environment. And then eventually, the groups that were able to secure and stockpile the most resources were those same racial groups. They were able to secure and stockpile the most power over the other racial groups. And so now it becomes where racism is an issue because now it's like, okay, well, we came from one area, we stockpiled resources to protect our people that look like us because we need our group of people to survive. And because we were able to also get more control and more land or more territories, then we can now tell you what you can and cannot have. And the cumulative effect of this migration, the cumulative effect of race and power leads to the psychological trauma that we have with poverty and adversity and trauma that's passed down from generations to generations. um, do you know or do you remember when we had like the Great Recession or even like well, obviously you don't really know it from yourself, but like the World War II or the Great Recession, There was a lot of poverty, a lot of death, and there was a lot of insecurity financially. And can your family even survive? And
Mm-hmm.
so, just from a psychological standpoint, if you think about how just not too long ago we had World War II and the Great Recession, but people who are still living, or people who are grandchildren, people who had parents who lived during that, they are still very cost conscious. They are very much afraid of not having enough. And that, excuse me, that financial and psychological trauma is passed down because it started maybe 30 or 50 years ago with a war that left half of the country impoverished. And so if we can see how that leaves us impoverished today, and maybe our grandparents are not even living anymore, then imagine the compounded nature of having groups of people die just because of not having enough resources, all the way back through our ancestors when it was just the earlier stages of man. So, whenever you have one group of race conquering more power, conquering more land, they are then using it as a way to avoid a return to traumatic conditions. And so, the best way we can think of it, as if we were to go back to our first episode, the insurrection. If we have a group of people who are saying, make America great again, they're again referring to before they had a Black person who was in charge of this country. And so if you have a group of people who are wanting to regain or to maintain power, then the way to do that is to control the resources. But in order to make sure that you, if you're going to be part of our group that has now conquered and pilfered, then you have to abide by our new social norms of collaboration, reciprocity, in order to have safety. So, what that looks like is what we're seeing in the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't collaborate by helping us to get this person in office, or helping us to get this lawsuit thrown out, if you don't do quo with reciprocity, if you do this for us, we'll do this for you, then we cannot guarantee your safety.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, if you're going against the social norms of collaboration, reciprocity, and safety, then we're going to not only kick you out of our group, but now you will be like the people that we have pilfered and taken power over. And so nobody wants that. And so, just from the psychology and fear of survival, you're going to say, okay, well, then never mind. I don't care how crazy it sounds. I need to keep this paycheck or keep my family alive. So I will abide by these new social norms of just survival. And then that's what we have today, whether you're Republican or not. It just, from a human standpoint, it's the groups of people that migrated and were able to conquer more trusting and more giving lands and people, and then use that to then trick or deceive to gain more power, to then be able to maintain that power, and then to limit resources just based off of the physical obvious characteristics of who looks like what we look like, because that lets us know that they came from the same trauma that we came from, that we're not trying to revisit.
Really fascinated by the breakdown that you've
Mm-hmm.
provided. It's really cool.
Yeah, and unfortunately, whenever I would, a lot of times, I'm in the boardroom giving this presentation, and when we get to this part, people might say, "So you're saying that it's just white people because obviously we're not brown, we didn't have a lot of sun." And my answer is, it's not really about white people or Black people. It could have been reversed. If Black people had been in a harsher environment, they would have had, out of necessity of survival, to become more brutal and more self-focused in their own survival. So it's more so just the psychology of how humanity evolves in surviving, and that instinct to survive will make you do anything. Like we said, look at the pandemic. I was even stockpiling. Well, I probably didn't need nail polish, but I was stockpiling nail polish and acetone and things I wouldn't normally get, and aspirin, just in case. I always think I'm going to be this main person in the apocalypse to save the world. So just in case, I would have all the resources to help people get better and to use different things to mark walls that can tell people where the safety zone is. So, all these kind of things people would still do just to survive. And there's no one who can blame any other group of people or living organisms from doing that. If we had Martians who were coming from one harsh planet to another, we could understand from a psychological standpoint, they're just trying to survive. And so if you look at it from that standpoint, just the science of survival and the instinct to live, then that might help to let people see that it's not a wrong or right. It's just what humans do to live.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So let's just fast forward it to today. We're no longer
Mhm.
in the frozen tundra of, long ago of our ancestors. But what we can see is that there is a cumulative effect of this evolutionary social behavior of survival that brings us to the racism and diversity challenges that we have today. And what that means is that racism based off of same external characteristics of how we look. And in order to maintain power, there is no benefit to diversity. We're only having diversity now because of the backlash that goes back to the monetary threats. So if there is no need for us to just all get along from an economic standpoint, there really would not be any need for any person, regardless of color, to want to give up power, because that loss of power triggers the innate instinct to survive, which was saying, if I give up this power, what will become of me or my family or my people? So, no, I'm not going to give this up. And I don't care about if we have to have pink, purple, and green and lime green people in our community having resources. I really don't care if that means there's going to be a threat to my survival and to me having an abundant lifestyle that I become accustomed to. So, based off of that, that's one reason why so many diversity initiatives fail in our country. And it's because the focus is more on the optics or on the economy of that corporation, of that state, or of that high profile leader. The diversity program is focusing more on the reputation of that corporation rather than the actual desire to make it a more diverse world. And I think I mentioned the menu example last week. If people were to look at diversity as a benefit where we all can have more variety, we all can have higher levels of skill, then just like if you're going to choose Korean today, Thai tomorrow, Italian this weekend, that variety truly is the spice of life that could make us a truly melting pot America, where we all can just, do better and live better, rather than having one group of people to hold the power and the other to be the receiving end of having bare minimum to survive, which just creates a bigger and bigger dissension and divide among the people. But before, so those are just a few things to think about how race and racism evolved from a psychological standpoint of survival. But I do want people to think about the opposite is also true. So if we're thinking about this from a theoretical or philosophical conversation, imagine, going back to, thousands of years with, the ancestors. If there had been no harsh environments, you can still have migration, you can still have advancements in technology. But if every person, if every group of people, if every race had everything that they needed all the time and without fail, then there would be no need for racism. So if we were to have like this worldwide utopia where there was a true continued sharing of resources, our social norm is reciprocity and collaboration, regardless of who you are, regardless of what you look like, then there would be no racism, because racism is only to divide the races, to then also to divide the power. So those are the main things, just from a very quick presentation. This is usually like a 8 hour, conversation that I would have. So I don't want to, go on too long, but I just do want everyone to understand that, if the tables were turned and a group of Martians came in and they were much stronger than humans, then they could overtake us. And then it would be a war
Mhm.
of the worlds where then they would be the ones who were in power because their planet was dying. And just from a survival standpoint, there is, I think, it gives us a heart to hear, maybe from a psychological understanding of, okay, well, I can see how that happened. And that also, I think, gives people who are in the predominant or the more privileged race a chance to see, okay, so there's not about, this CRT or racism is all about me as a person being this bad person, but I can see intellectually how this happened and maybe forgive my ancestors or even forgive my own family members for still maintaining racist beliefs. But now that I can see it from a scientific standpoint, now I can also approach it from a smart or a scientific standpoint to now reverse what we're seeing today, to then go back to sharing resources and creating new social norms rather than perpetuating lies that we have to just keep everything all to ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to die. So, those are just some of the things I would suggest.
So going back to the race and diversity being a buzzword and being kind of
Mm-hmm.
like used as a political platform, like what are some of the takeaways you think we can think about like at a high level?
I think that if we were to think about, let's look at just the evolution of humanity and what really is the definition of humanity. Like, how humane are we being? Or are we responding out of psychological trauma that's causing us to want to hoard resources or to not let power go? But that would be, of course, a very huge philosophical conversation and discussion. So then, where I usually come in is, let's just start with your family. Let's start with this corporation. Let's start with this, this group of legislators. And how can we understand, okay, this is what it is. This is the psychological impact. And how can we just change at the beginning the very smallest of steps? And that smallest of steps may just be giving more funding across the board to every public school gets the same amount of funding if they are a public school, regardless of the zip code. If you can go even bigger than that, okay, well, now we'll make sure that every community has access to high quality healthcare. Or it just may be that we're not going to discriminately put recycling and the recycling furnaces and having those strategically only in the poor
Mm-hmm.
areas. We'll put those in places where there are no people. So being more diligent and seeking, is this action unfairly discriminating against, oppressing, or causing it to be a disadvantage to any group of people? This could be the same thing if you were in a candy store. Okay, well, if we have, people who are little kids, why would you have all the candy 6 feet high? We would have it where it's more equitable so people can access it for wherever they are, and just start with that. And then don't make it a big deal of race. Focus on, okay, this is just our humanity that we're going to focus on bringing us together. And unfortunately, we really only have great acts of humanity when there's a national crisis or a tragedy. Look at 9/11. So look at the pandemic. People will then try to, when you come out of the crisis or the trauma, focus on, okay, how can we just all get along? I don't care what color you are. I don't care of your political background. I want to just still help you. Whenever it comes down to such situations as just surviving, I think America is beautiful, but we have to just focus on how can we truly just be there for everyone, and not only after a national tragedy or a global crisis.
But I think also to your point about types of foods to have a diverse menu or whatever,
Right.
I know that there are lots of communities, and I speak from personal experience from some of my where I have grown up. There is no diversity, so it
Right.
is very homogeneous in terms of the type of people that live in these communities. And so I think that it's hard when that exists in pockets of
Right,
our
right,
country. So this, even the going back to all of the history that you kind of went through, while it logically makes sense, I feel like culturally it's still difficult if there is a lack of diversity or a
right.
need to address it on a daily basis. Like living in the South, living in a community that is very diverse, it's
Mm-hmm.
not something I can like hide away and pretend doesn't exist. You know, I mean, I guess I
Mm-hmm.
could technically. I'm a white person, but I've chosen not to because it's so important to me to be
Right.
a good community member.
Well, I think that just goes back to the geographical settings of persons. Like, okay, well, this is all I know. So this is the only information I have. And that's why it is very crucial to have honest conversations with different groups of people or with honest recounting of history inside classrooms or even in corporate settings to really say, okay, well, this is what has happened. How can we have dialogues and conversations that are outside of our comfort zones so that we can expand mutual awareness and mutual understanding, and then make that our new social norm of collaboration and reciprocity of information. This is what I do in my country. This is what we do in your country. I grew up in the military, so I'm kind of used to like a melting pot, but in every new country I would go to, you would have to learn we wear this here. This is the new food, or this is where you have to start eating as the new candy. Like you're exposed to different things. And once you try it, then you like can say, oh, okay, well, I guess this is good. But other than, of course, being deployed in the military, I would just encourage everyone to make an active action to just understand one race a month, maybe. Or
Mm.
if you could read one article from a non-Black or a non-white or whatever opposite from what your race is, or just a different race other than what's in your community, then reading an article, if you have, for example, a Black child, everything is not, the white man this, the white man that. So maybe you may want to get them a white doll, and then vice versa. If you have a white daughter, it's okay to get her a Black doll and different toys. And you're watching cartoons, you're watching different TV shows with children. Those are just one ways to not only just decrease the opportunity for racism to develop, but to just also increase awareness of other cultures. And that by having that constant contact or that close contact, you can then understand for yourself, oh, okay, well, not all this people are bad, or not all that people are bad. So I think it just takes an active learning and an active desire to do something different, to go outside of your neighborhood, outside of your comfort zone, outside of your friend zone, to actually make connections, or to only join organizations, move into neighborhoods, go to schools, work at jobs where there is an honest and authentic emphasis on diversity.
And actually, I'm going to refer back to growing up in a church environment, which
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe there seems to be a wave of vitriol coming out
Mm-hmm.
that is connected somehow to evangelical Christian kind of
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
wave of people. And like I'm thinking back to my past. I did grow up in the Southern Baptist Church.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a preacher my whole life. We in the church were taught to praise differences and to
Right.
explore the world, and that it was a beautiful place. And like I remember I was a kid and we were like in a class where we made different foods from all over the world, and it
Mm-hmm.
was like an
Mm-hmm.
exciting adventurous thing that was celebrated. So for
Right.
me to see this movement is very disorienting in some ways because I don't know how it's connected to this idea of Christianity. It's
Right. Well,
really
because it's not really
yeah.
connected to Christianity. It's connected to selfishness
Mm.
and pride and greed. If
Which
you were
is
truly to
very
look at
much
what,
not
right, which is the opposite, but they're just using that as a cover, which then of course hurts people who actually are trying to find, a way of religion or spiritual growth for themselves, because they see these bad examples of people who are taking information and twisting it for their own benefit or for their gain. And so it is upsetting. But if you look at what people are truly doing versus what you know in your heart of what a true evangelical should be doing, then you know for yourself, okay, well, that person is just an imposter who is just using that for their benefit to take advantage of other people under the guise of just being so holy and perfect and God fearing. Even slavery was, there were a lot of religion used to control and to permit slavery to even happen. So knowing more information will help people to understand. You can even misuse information like with evangelically to then say, okay, well, women shouldn't be, president, or women shouldn't, have jobs, or women should just be, it should be okay for them to be abused or even killed in some countries if they don't obey or submit to the husband. So
Yeah.
you have to really know for yourself, and don't just listen to what a group of people are saying is, oh, this is what evangelicals do. We all support. So that just goes back to that whole safety of social norms, meaning I'm going to
Mhm.
stick to this crazy belief because it's better for me and my family to go along and to get along rather than to say the truth and then be cast out myself. It was unfortunate, but that's what's happening. And again, that's what's happening with different political groups. I'm only voting for you because you're part of my party, but I really don't agree with what you're saying. But because I don't want to lose my own notoriety, or I don't want to lose my position or your favor, I'm going to just say what you want me to say, or say what's in line with what you want me to say.
Mhm.
And those are all selfish, and that's not caring about other people. That's more
Well,
coming from a very selfish standpoint and survival only standpoint.
and let's not forget that uh, there's like a concentrated effort to push these kinds of ideas through the media,
Right. Very
to
much true.
so
But
especially like because I'm thinking of some of my family that lives in very rural parts of the country. That's all they're getting is this
mm-hmm.
information that is inaccurate, not factual, and really scaring people
Right.
into believing lies, basically.
One, obviously, I'm a scientist and a nerd, so I don't have any problem looking for information to verify it myself. But I would encourage someone, if fear is a tactic that's being used to make you do something or to say something, then that's a sign that you are also being manipulated rather than educated. And then take that as a sign to then study for yourself or just research it from yourself from places that are not your typical resources of information, whether it's a person, a website, or a news channel. Ask someone else who doesn't believe what you believe, what do you listen to? What stations or what books or what persons? And then get more information to make more of an informed decision rather than just listening to just what one person tells you or what one group of people tell you. Find
Mm-hmm.
out for yourself. Be informed, which is one of the reasons for the show, is unbiased information so people can make their own decisions regardless of what that is. Just be informed for yourself.
So I think this is a good moment to move into some other specific actions or
Mm-hmm.
provoking
Provoking
thoughts
action.
or
Mm-hmm.
actions. So I thought if it's all right with you, I would just kind of expand on something we talked about in the last
Mm-hmm.
episode a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fine.
So we mentioned in the last episode that was about critical race theory, just the idea, some of the ways that like white folk can
Mm-hmm.
sort of help fight racial justice if that's something that is of interest. There's a resource that I linked to on our website, provocativeconversationspodcast.com, but I thought I would just kind of mention it a little bit more in depth.
Okay.
So we talked about being, rather than just being an ally, to learn to become an accomplice.
Mm-hmm.
And the resource that I shared actually talks about the 3 different levels that you can be a part of. So you can be an actor, an ally, or an accomplice.
Mm.
The reason why I wanted to mention this resource is because it's really cool in that it
Mm-hmm.
kind of breaks down different specific things. Like for example, if like me, I like to go out, well, before the pandemic, but I would go to different protests and marches and things like that. So it can just talk to you about, this resource will tell you, like, as an actor, you'll show up, it's comfortable, it's usually led by white people, and that actually is very accurate. But then if you want to move into an ally, you help organize protests that interrupt business as usual and force other white people to confront or recognize the different kinds of, like, that comfortability, right? And then,
so let me ask you a question. So with you as you said, the most white person in America, if you were trying to help your white members or your cohorts to become comfortable with this conversation, forgetting your activist history, and you are being, very culturally aware, what would you actually say to them so they can feel comfortable even taking the first step?
so I feel like this is going back to the idea of, if you feel in your spirit that there needs to be something said, then don't ignore that. So, and I don't know how to really eloquently
Right.
say
I guess
that.
make that as that's you not having a choice. Like either
Yeah.
you can be silent, meaning you agree with it, or you can feel as if you don't have a choice
Yes.
to not be silent, and you're forced to act.
You're forced to act, but then to think about it in another way. So, like, that would be an actor or even an ally. But if you want to become an accomplice, you look at what other people have no choice to do or not to do. So, like, I might be comfortable. I don't have to worry about, some specific things that my neighbor may have to worry about. So I need to think beyond my own self and comfort, and speak up for the people that, I, or show up for the people that don't have as much access that I have. So, like,
I agree
creating
with
those
that.
things. But and then to take it to another level, to be an accomplice, sort of as a white person. And I honestly, this one's a little challenging for me, if I'm being completely honest.
Well, that's good. That's what you want, honesty.
Is to not take up the space of organizing. And I made a joke about that last time. Like, don't take over the things.
Right.
But, like, putting Black, brown, or Indigenous people sort of at the forefront of organizing, and respecting the leadership of people of color, versus, like, just being like, I know the best way to do all these things, and I know
Coming,
it's,
being like what they say, the white savior.
yeah. So, and then, like, checking in and making sure that that's okay, that the space you're taking up isn't taking up somebody else's space or whatever.
I think that's a good idea.
It's a hard one, but
Yeah, I also think one of the recommendations I have, obviously, unfortunately, a lot of the Fortune 500 companies are not owned or run by minority persons. So a lot of my clients are Caucasian, non-minority persons. And, in suggestions for creating a social impact program, one thing can simply and easily be, without any psychological discomfort, without any social backlash from your close peers and family, is to just recognize that you do have power to at least make one phone call to get an introduction, to help with funding, to get into the ear of a congressperson or another leader in HR or in the industry, to just be able to use your power in a very small way to you, but could make a world of difference for another group of people or an organization, or just in like hiring or housing or food supply practices. So the easiest thing I would say is to don't really do anything, but just use your power to just be in front of a camera, or to just be in the room. And you could be as a quote unquote silent partner, meaning that, well, just my presence alone helps to show that there really is some validity and there really is some importance to this issue without you even having to say a word. Just your presence as a white person alone can hold a lot of power. And the thing is to just use your power to help empower other races as well.
And then another thing that this resource talks about is, like white communities. So we've been talking about that a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
one suggestion as an accomplice is to actually disrupt white spaces. So actually creating
Mm,
discomfort in
right.
places where other white people and whiteness would otherwise just be pretty comfy. And I have
Mm-hmm.
to admit that this is probably one of my strongest points as an
Yes.
accomplice.
Yes, that is you.
So, but this resource says white community is a support pillar of white supremacy. So,
Mm-hmm.
like making sure that that is disrupted. And anyway,
Right.
so there are different levels, and like I think my thing is it doesn't it all levels are like I think you said this earlier. Everything, every little bit matters. So,
Right. Right. It all starts somewhere. And also, just as my two last things, I would say one, diversity is not only for Black people,
mhm.
diversity is for a wide range of characteristics and demographics. It could be race, it could be gender. It also could be for people who only speak Portuguese. It could be people who
Mhm.
only love dark chocolate. I mean, diversity is for anything that's not the same. So try to encourage yourself to expand on the definition of diversity. Diversity is not the pushing up of only Black people and the pushing down only of white people. Instead, what it is just making more space for all races to have a seat at the table and for all races to have the same opportunity, and with no one being in unjustly or inadvertently being oppressed. Not white people, not Black people. It's where everyone has a diverse opportunity to share their experiences, their backgrounds, and to become whatever their true and highest potential is. And then the last thing is you are able to have inclusion without assimilation, meaning that it's perfectly okay to do DoorDash and have your Chinese food and then go pick up my Papa John's at the same time. So you can have inclusion without saying, oh no, if I support diversity, that means I have to go start wearing a dashiki and get an afro and speak a certain kind of way. No, diversity just means I'm just open to having diverse conversations, diverse relationships, and making sure that the places that I am are also embracing and appreciating the diversity that other races and other groups of different demographics also bring to the table. So that was it.
Yeah. And, I think it's just sort of the opposite of the stop woke act. In fact, I'm
Yes.
now playing around with that and I'm thinking, I'm going to do something with start woke action or something like that. Uh,
Yes. Yes.
we want to start woke action, Dr. Renee.
That sounds like something you would do. You're more of the rebel. You're more of the rebel rouser, and I'm the all like, let's just look at the data and let's just love each other. And I'm gonna go make some cookies.
I think
So
it's a good marriage.
no, I think it's great. I like that. I like that, especially because I'm not a white person. Yes, I have, influential clients, but even if I were a white person and I was at the parking lot, you could stop a whole lot more traffic than what I would just by, race alone. So I think it's good that you recognize and that you do have that ability, you do have that influence, and that you are not ashamed or afraid to use it, which is why I think you did a great job when you were running for office. Hope you consider doing it again because you truly are an authentic, quote, woke person, white person who truly does care about everybody, not just anyone because they are of a same race or a same financial status.
I think that sounds very good and exciting. So, next week, we're going to start a 2-part series on love in the time of COVID.
I'm very much looking forward to that.
It is coming nearer to Valentine's Day, so let's all get our hearts ready and our minds open.
We are your provocateurs. I'm Dr. Renee.
And I'm Dr. Alicia.
Be informed, be entertained, be provoked.
All right. All right.
That sounded really weird and
I was doing like
perverted.
I was doing like a chicken exercise, like.
It sounded like something was going on. I was like, ooh, okay.
Hit record. Let's get started.